Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of In Retrospect. Today we're going to be talking about and discussing Marilyn Manson's 2012 album, Born Villain. So with that, let's get into it. Starting off with track 1, Hey Cruel World. The song opens up with a noir-style guitar riff that shows the influence that would later be more flushed out in Deep Six off of the following album, The Pale Emperor. Here I do appreciate the guitar tones that are being used as well. They seem more reminiscent of the tones that were used on Antichrist Superstar, but here they're a little bit more dialed in and controlled, less muddy and chaotic. Manson's vocals take the spotlight as usual, but I also can't help but find it hard to listen to them. More specifically with the doubled layers on the main vocal. So what I mean by that is you've got two vocals, you've got the main vocal and the layered vocal, and most of the time with layered vocals, they're two separate takes, so they're going to be over each other, but they sound almost like they're not exactly on time with one another, and they're, how do I say it, they're interfering with each other's pitches. So the tail end of the first track, of the first pitch, whatever that word is, whatever pitch it's hitting, is now hitting the second pitch on the second take, which is, it's just creating this dissonant-y kind of noise in the frequencies with the mix, and it clashes, and it makes it more of an ear sore than anything to listen to, in my opinion. If you want to know what I'm talking about, this is what I mean. The song thematically delves into the perspectives of defiance, fate, and the rejection of expectations. Lyrics like, "Hey cruel world, you don't have what it takes. We don't need your faith, we got fucking fate." Here Manson is highlighting that fate is the end-all be-all. Your faith is irrelevant because not even faith can beat fate. So having a faith at the end of the day isn't going to do anything to help you because it just can't compete with the natural order of the world. Creator, preserver, destroyer. Ask which one I am. In this line, I feel like Manson is emphasizing the power of the individual. We are the ones in control of our own destiny. Doing away with the typical notion of a higher power and rather claiming that we are that higher power instead. There's no drugged out devils or square haloed angels walking among us. I am among no one. This to me seems like the rejection of archetypes or the stereotypes that come with good and evil. I think it's further pointing to that idea with the lyric square halo angels, which I interpret as the typical saying of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, showing that people can't all fit into the same categories. Manson then adds a layer of alienation to this with I am among no one, by saying essentially that true identity or individuality with your identity is like isolation. If you are truly an individual, then you will always be alone because there is no one else like you. Building off of this with the center of the universe cannot exist when there are no edges. Here Manson is saying that the stereotypes can't exist if we refuse to confine ourselves to them. Without these walls, there are no expectations. Instrumentally and lyrically, a good opener, but the production on the vocals themselves, I feel like, hurt this song. Moving on to track 2, No Reflection. This song puts the aggressive guitar tones of Hey Cruel World away and opts for a more retreated approach. sitting back further in the mix, making more room for the bass and vocals to make up the body of the song. Luckily, the vocal problem I had with Hey Cruel World doesn't exist here, so I get to enjoy it from start to finish a little bit better. Lyrically, the song builds off of the previous themes of identity and alienation, with lyrics like crushing, cheating, changing, am I deaf or am I dead? Or, sorry, am I deaf or dead? To me, this is Manson questioning his own sanity and whether or not what he's perceiving is valid. It's an internal conflict that highlights the confusion of his own individuality and the distortion in reality that he is fighting with. Is this constricting construction or just streets with rusty signs of something violent coming? I feel like this represents the internal and external conflicts that Manson has. Constricting construction, to me, this symbolizes the internal pressures and limitations that Manson feels, whether that's the expectations he places on himself or his own self-doubt. It gives off the feeling that he's trapped inside of his own mind. Streets with rusty signs of violence coming. This symbolizes the external world and the fading promises that come with it. There's a sense of decay that is being used here with the rusting signs to show, as a warning more so than anything, that things lose their meaning or become distorted over time. I don't know which me that I love got no reflection. This lyric, I believe, perfectly encapsulates the core theme of the song. Manson's inability to recognize or understand his true self. He's fighting against multiple versions of himself that he ultimately can't decide which one of them is the real him. And inevitably, he feels lost because of it. There's no direction out from the void he finds himself in. A gun's cliche and a razor too. I'm not a death share vacation, vacant station. To me, I feel like this is talking about Manson's self-destructive urges. He's not seeking a release through death, but rather an escape from existence. Manson feels devoid of purpose, and the meaninglessness of his life and what he's experiencing in that moment drives him to these self-destructive impulses and these self-destructive tendencies. Overall, a great song. The industrial rock sound mixed with a really great chorus and catchy chorus, for me, makes this the best song on the album. Moving on to track 3, Pistol Whipped. Here the song opts for a more stripped down approach that uses the guitar during the chorus for dynamic and impact. The addition of the inconsistent pick scraping on the guitar strings adds to the unsettling tension that the song creates. Vocally and lyrically though, there's not much here appealing to me. Most of his lyrics are locked to the same rhythm that the guitars are doing, which makes sense for trying to make a wall of sound, stacking sounds on top of each other to create impact. But it makes listening through it redundant and boring because of the lack of variation. The song flows instrumentally after No Reflection. However, I don't think it is a good follow-up to that song. It feels like it's an underwhelming direction to take after the tone that No Reflection set. And lyrically, there's not really much to dive into, in my opinion. I would say 90% of the lyrics are pretty much what they are at face value, and the other 10% are a little bit more abstract. Like, I want to have your ache and beat you too. Which is basically the equivalent of saying, you want to have your cake and eat it too. It's just a more violent play on that phrase, a little bit more masochistic and sadistic in that nature. It to me, it just sounds like he both wants his partner's pain while also wanting to be the one who is giving it. Thematically, I think the song talks about the struggle of violence and control in an abusive relationship while playing into a pain fetish that Manson both likes to give and receive, either sexually or emotionally or both. It's an underwhelming song with not really much making me want to go back and listen to it. Moving on to song 4, Overneath, The Path of Misery. It opens up with a vocoded monologue talking about the nihilism of existence that lasts for nearly a minute. When the drums kick in, it gives an energy back to the album that No Reflection and Hey Cruel World had. The guitars again take a bit of a backseat and are used more for accenting until the chorus comes, where they become more present. Vocally, this song showcases Manson's range. At first, the high note in the chorus is very jarring and it feels completely out of place. But the more you listen to it, the more it grows on you and the more you start to just agree, yeah, it totally belongs there. The song seems to be talking about nihilism and mortality. And he uses lyrics from Shakespeare's Macbeth to help kind of paint that picture. Stare into my Kodak room, jackhammer ice eyes. I never thought you'd see the asphalt. Crack, 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 like a black eggshell. Now I'm going to break this entire thing down. Stare into my Kodak room. I believe this is being used as a way to describe something as visibly picture perfect. A representation of the image he wants to present, Manson that is, a representation of the image that Manson would like to present to the world while hiding the reality of the one beneath the surface. Jackhammer ice eyes. To me, this is being used to describe the violence in the cold stare of someone or something without empathy. I never thought you'd see the asphalt crack, crack, crack like a black eggshell. Manson is saying that he never knew that people would ever see the true side of him. He never thought people would ever see the imperfections that he carries, the cracks beneath the facade, essentially. The cracks in the dam, those kinds of things where people can peer into the reality that he is concealing. Don't ever say I never warned you from the start. You're not a shovel and I'm not your dirt. Basically, Manson is saying be careful what you wish for because you will regret it. You can't change him because he is what he is. No one else can fix him, essentially, or try to help him. He is the only one who can fix these broken pieces. Why die when you can kill the father? Dad is missing an E. So this is a bit of a fun lyric. Dad with an E, if you just insert the E into it, where you think it logically goes, would spell dead, D-E-A-D. And in the context of the line right before it, it's insinuating that father is death, and death is usually the representation of the Grim Reaper. So Manson is asking, why not just kill death? If you kill death, then you can't die. No Macbeth confessed, Oedipus no longer present tense. This is a highly, highly abstract line that I think can have so many different interpretations. I don't even know if I'm completely understanding it myself, to be honest, but I'm going to give a crack at it. The one I lean to is that it's simply implying that with time, the stories Manson tells will become relics. Something that will eventually fade into obscurity and be disconnected from relevance hundreds of years from now, just like the stories of Macbeth. While Shakespearean stories and all of these things that we read when you're in school, like, yes, okay, we read them and we still pay attention to them, but they have no meaning to our lives as they stand. They're just stories. That's all they are. It's the equivalent of, reading Gilgamesh. It's just a myth. It's a story. That's it. That there is no real world connection that we have to it besides it being our past. I won't regret letting you live even if you forgot what you never saved me from. Here Manson is saying that he in some way forgives the transgressions committed against him as an acceptance of imperfection. He understands that holding on to resentment serves no purpose and will ultimately destroy him. The rape of Persephone was choreographed by all the wrong Greeks. The rape of Persephone was a marketing scheme. I feel like this is Manson basically saying the most crazy thing to make people question the underlying meaning of them. Insinuating that the stories themselves were made with specific agendas to benefit those in charge. So him saying this line is basically just something where you're just basically paying attention, and then you hear it and you're like, what the hell was that kind of situation. But it's meant to create a reaction, essentially. It's all fabricated and constructed for that exact reaction and that outcome. Rape, Persephone. A play on words that is both saying rape Persephone and using phony as a way to build off of the previous lyrics meaning, saying that it was fake, essentially. And again, another way to just create an artificial outrage, essentially, or an artificial outcome. From the top of my lungs to the bottom of my heart, I scream at the chasm in between and the path of misery. I see this as Manson talking about existence. One side of this cavern, so I like to think of this as a ravine almost. You've got two sides and then in between, right? So one side is life and the other is death, but the in between is the chasm itself is the misery that comes with existence. The song isn't bad, but definitely took some time to grow on me. Moving on to track 5, Slo-Mo-Tion. This song starts off with a really groovy bass riff that really holds the entire song together. Overall, it focuses on simplicity and not overcomplicating it, but the repetitiveness can be a bit distracting. It has almost a radio-friendly vibe to the instrumental, which makes sense because it was released as a single. However, the lyrical content would speak to the contrary. They are very provocative and talk about violence, sexuality, and blurring the lines between pleasure and pain, all the while questioning the nature of celebrity and fame. You've got your hell's teeth smiling at you. It keeps your brain safe as it all eats at your face. This is talking about the corrupting influences of the world and that we're allowing ourselves to be corrupted for our own good or our own enjoyment. It's like it's in our best interest, but ultimately those decisions are destroying and slowly consuming us. This is my beautiful show, and everything is shot in slow motion. Manson is presenting himself as a master manipulator, and here he's suggesting that he is in complete control of the narrative. Whether that's about him, about something else, just in general, he is the man behind the curtain, the one pulling all the strings. He's the director of this film. Slow motion is being used to symbolize the heightened awareness of the fine details of the performance that he's presenting, going back to the previous song about what it is, the imagery, the Kodak roam, the image he wants people to see that hides and conceals the reality beneath the surface. Pumping the laughter of dead audience applause and teenage rape candidates. These lines both work in tandem with each other. The first half is talking about forcing a response to something that is manufactured, then using the second half as a means to get that manufactured response. An artificial provocation to stir the pot, essentially. Something that, as we know throughout a lot of Manson's career, he's very good at. The song overall is enjoyable, but honestly, it just kind of feels like it comes and goes and doesn't really leave anything besides the bass groove as memorable. Moving on to track 6, The Gardener. Similarly, this song takes a page out of the previous one with letting the bass take the spotlight. It also follows a similar structure where the guitars are used as accents in the chorus and from the second verse onwards, and don't really see much playtime in the first minute and 30 seconds of the song. Vocally, it is a little more different and a little bit more interesting in the sense of it's doing something completely different on the album. Manson does more of a spoken word style vocal in this song and sings in the chorus, making the song feel almost like an open letter to himself. Thematically, the song delves into obsession, control, and the destructive nature of desire in a relationship, with lyrics like, "I'm not man enough to be human, but I'm trying to fit in and I'm learning to fake it." Here Manson stating how he feels inadequate, how no matter what he does, he will ultimately never feel like he's worth it. But he's trying to fake it till he makes it, because maybe if he pretends long enough, it will just somehow become his new normal. It's like a garden with two flowers, one just blooming and casting a shadow just like yours, and then it becomes a struggle of sunlight or rain or weeds. Basically, here Manson's talking about how two people in a relationship at the start are perfectly fine with one another. Then as time goes on, it becomes a struggle for dominance, controlling everything that they can. At first, both of these flowers live in harmony, but soon they start choking each other because they're trying to consume and grow as much as they can. But now they're the only two things left, and there's nowhere else to grow. So the only way one can grow is to destroy the other. She and every she is doomed to be your idea of her. Essentially, here Manson is saying that no matter what happens, every woman that he's in a relationship with will never live up to his expectations and desires, therefore making the relationship eventually deteriorate. You are no longer the flower and the sun, and most importantly, the garden or the gardener. Amuse your amusement. I am used. That's it's all ruined if you meet their friends. The woman in this relationship, Manson no longer sees as something he wants in life because it's not what he expected. She's just something now that the dark desires can toy with, essentially, for his own amusement. He doesn't want to meet her friends because they'll talk around, they'll essentially lie or they'll say things, and now your perception of that person and your bias is already created. It's not just this blank slate. Now there's already a direction. There's a canvas that's already been painted on. And now, whether it's good or bad, you now have an opinion of that person. It's now this preconceived notion, essentially, that Manson has, and he can't look at them the same. Your book isn't burned, it was never written. Here, Manson's simply saying that there is no story to burn or destroy because nothing ever happened. The ideas that her friends were putting in his head about her are the opposite of what she was. Now the mystery is gone completely, and there's nothing left for Manson to explore himself. While definitely not a song I ever find myself going back to, definitely unique in the sense of the vocal style itself. I've been running from the bloodless for fear of exile. Moving on to track 7, The Flowers of Evil. The song begins with a brooding and dissonant atmospheric tone that is greeted by the guitar around the 42-second mark and the bass and drums around the 57-second mark. The guitar takes a back seat in this song again and almost feels like the bass overpowers it in the beginning verse. The use of dissonance is aimed to create a sense of paranoia and fear that shows themselves the best when the rest of the instrumental has dropped out in between the verses. However, I feel like the song takes forever to get to the point. The entire first half of the song feels like it's building up to a climax that never really comes. Or what seems like what was intended to be a climax at the 2-minute and 34-second mark. And it just doesn't feel like it was worth the wait. Manson's vocals on the song fall into a similar critique that I had with Hey Cruel World. The layers don't mesh well together, and the vocals themselves feel out of place in the instrumental. The constant clashing of the pitches takes the enjoyment out of listening. And now an argument can be made that it was intentional to make the vocals cause a dissonance with the rest of the instrumental, because we know Manson likes to try really weird stuff and just about anything that would fit the atmosphere of the song, and rather this would fit the atmosphere of the song with the dissonance. However, I think it does more damage to the experience because nothing else stands out from the song to make the listener stay engaged, as there are a lot of repeating lyrics. Similar to Birds of Hell Waiting off of The Pale Emperor, but with a less interesting instrumental to hold it all together. Thematically, the song deals with abuse, exploitation, and dehumanization in a relationship. Lyrics like, "The day they covered us in the dirt, like stars in the ground that will grow into dead flowers." Here I believe Manson is talking to himself and using they as a representation of any of the relationships he has had or will had or has had or will have. And us is being used to represent both Manson and Brian. The dirt is being used to represent the dirt is being used to represent the abuse and trauma weighing them down, burying the spirit of Manson and Brian, essentially crushing their ability to thrive. Like stars in the ground that will grow into dead flowers, I feel is being used as a metaphor to invoke a sense of wasted potential. There was so much, like, it's essentially saying, like, there was so much possible for us, but now this abuse is killing me, and the only thing that will be left to show of it is what we could have been, essentially. Your body's on me like sleepless spiders. Your touch is so empty. Here I believe Manson is trying to convey a sense of violation and emotional detachment. He's pointing out the power imbalance in the relationship where one person exploits and manipulates the other, essentially saying, you keep touching me, but none of it means anything because there's an ulterior motive behind it all. I've been running from the bloodless for fear of exile. Manson is using bloodless as a way to symbolize the threat of conformity and the suppression of individuality, while also saying that if he was to stop running and let society and the social norms convert him, they would ultimately just exile him because they wouldn't be able to change him. So the solution to the problem would become a, out of sight, out of mind. Just, throw him under the rug, just under the bed, just out of sight, put him away. We don't have to see him. He doesn't exist. Overall, it's a song that is thematically interesting with the lyrics that are presented, but instrumentally, I don't feel like capitalizes on that interest, making it feel like the song is showing its own wasted potential. Moving on to track 8, Children of Cain. It opens up with a very industrial style beat that feels almost robotic, with the addition of the 16-bit style percussion that quickly joins in, followed by a very somber yet haunting melody that brings the entire vision to completion during the chorus. Here, Manson's vocals take on the spotlight and remain seductive, yet also menacing at the same time throughout the song. Thematically, I think the song explores inherited sin, social decay, and the darkness within humanity. Lyrics like, "Sacrifice won't suffice, resurrection needs your death to happen twice." Here, Manson is pointing out the nihilistic perspectives that religion creates. Nothing you will ever do will ever be enough to get yourself into the pearly gates, because ultimately it resides on God to decide whether you're worthy or not, essentially. And the idea of resurrection seems compelling, but there's a part of you that also has to die again if you are to be resurrected. Fall on my heart and burn and forge your tortured black smitten into the sharpest fucking sword. I feel like Manson is using this to point out how religion uses pain as a way to maintain power. By forging his and others' hearts, their pain and trauma, into a weapon to further the destruction, making people feel like they are the problem, and the only way to redeem themselves is through religion. Don't assume that I'm always with you. It's just where my mortal body happens to be. This lyric is being used to point out the disassociation that Manson has from religion and reality. Though his physical body may be present, his mind is elsewhere. No sin eater to slay us children of Cain. To me, this line almost feels like an anthem. We are the children of Cain. It's almost like he's relating with us, essentially. Through religion, we are all descended from sin. So what is the point of trying to do anything or try to be anything except what we really are? Because at the end of the day, there will be no sin eater to absolve us from our trespasses. And the cycle will continue endlessly. Watching monkey suicide, Sunday AIDS, and church wine wash it away. Here, Manson is again pointing out the hypocrisy of religious institutions. They love watching people fall into self-destructive habits because it gives them a moral superiority. Manson then uses AIDS, AIDS, as in the epidemic, as a way to show that going to church is like spreading a disease. Something that will slowly kill and morally corrupt you. Then to top it off, you can feel like you've done something by taking part in the communion, but you really haven't done anything. It's just an arbitrary action with no real world what's I'm looking for? Provocation. And all the pages you spread, sweet as honey you said, but I'm choking on your bitter stories. Again, Manson is criticizing the hypocrisy of religion here. Essentially, he's saying that everything you said was a lie because I actually looked behind the curtain and I can see the emperor the emperor is wearing no clothes. And it's hard to believe anything you have to say going forward. Once a liar, always a fake. This song does a better job at what the previous song, The Flowers of Evil, was trying to accomplish, in my opinion. And honestly feels like something that would have felt right at home on Hollywood. Moving on to track 9, Disengaged. At this point in the album, it's starting to feel like Manson is treading water creatively with the instrumentals. This song, just like others before it, follows the same trend of atmospheric opening, followed by either the guitar or bass coming in, and later followed by the rest of the ensemble when the chorus comes in. It overall just feels boring and uninspired to listen to as an instrumental and doesn't really do much to keep my interest, especially since said interest was already waning with the past few songs that sounded very similar. Vocally as well, this song falls into the same problem and doesn't really offer anything gripping to make me want to go back and listen to it again. While the chorus vocally reintroduces some aggressive style vocals, it doesn't amount to anything memorable. Thematically, the song delves into instances of masochism, alienation, and disconnection, with lyrics like, "And I could look into the crowded morgue of mistakes." Manson is using this as a metaphor to represent his past failures, a brief moment of introspection as Manson acknowledges his own shortcomings. The sun stopped its smile and frowned on me too. Usually, the sun is universally shown to always be smiling. Manson saying that it's frowning instead is a way to say that even the happiest thing in the world is now looking down on him. My rebuilt, remastered heart is smashed into its faces, and its face is confused. Here, I believe Manson is talking about the emotional trauma that he's obtained over past relationships and how he's tried to move on, but the only way he found possible was through self-destruction. The act of smashing the heart can be seen as a way to show just how destructive the current relationship is just how destructive the current relationship is as well. I cut my throat in two. I said sorry to you for being a fool, but I didn't want forgiveness. I personally see this lyric as being either directed at the other person in the relationship or at Manson himself. He's both apologizing to himself and the other person, but doesn't want forgiveness because in the end he will make the same mistake again. It's the only way Manson gets to remain in control of his own suffering. It was regret, not an apology. Building off of the previous lyric, here Manson saying that he regrets how things turned out, but he isn't sorry for it because that's how he remains in control. If he can't fix his problems and still remain in control, then he would rather continue to hurt himself to keep the control. You're with me, against me, but the only thing forever is hate. Here, Manson is basically saying that it doesn't matter if you're in a healthy or destructive relationship with him. At the end of the day, you will hate him, and that hate will last forever in or out of the relationship. I'd trade all I was worth to make myself into the handsomest gun and put the diamond bullet into your 404 error 404 error face. I feel like this is Manson saying that he's basically at his breaking point with the relationship. He would love nothing more than to transform himself into an instrument of violence. The use of the phrase diamond bullet symbolizes the elegance that Manson perceives the act to contain, while the 404 error face represents the confusion of the other person that is questioning where all of this violence is coming from. Lyrically, the song has some depth to it, but again, it just feels forgettable from start to finish. Moving on to track 10, Lay Down Your Goddamn Arms. It seems like Manson also realized that the structure and progression of the aforementioned songs was getting stale and brought back some necessary life to the album. In my opinion, it's one of the best tracks the album has to offer. Manson's vocals soared during the chorus, and the melody progression is just such an earworm along with the opening guitar riff. While the instrumental doesn't do anything crazy and for the most part repeats the same riff over and over again, there is an undeniable grooviness to it. Once it's about to feel like it's overstayed its welcome, the change up in the chorus hooks you back in. Thematically, the song touches on vulnerability, inner conflict, identity, and control. I'm not of this world. You're not in this heart. This isn't me. This lyric is discussing how Manson feels persecuted in the world and how he doesn't feel like he belongs. In turn, because he feels like an outcast, the rest of the world is not in his heart, and he has disconnected himself from it. But at the end, he says, "This isn't in me," implying that Manson is also struggling to be in his own world. To open this box, you can't shoot the lock. I hide everything so you can't see. Here Manson's insinuating that brute force won't get you inside of his mind or his world. By doing so, he's posing some kind of challenge to those that want to even try. The box is being used to represent the vulnerability that he keeps locked away and that he is constantly guarding. Again, Manson also uses this as a moment to assert control in a situation. By hiding everything so nobody can see, he's remaining in control and uses this control to hide his true self, his intentions, or his pain. Wanna fight, wanna fuck, wanna die, try your luck, lay down your goddamn arms. This line has a lot to break down. Wanna fight is Manson's violent proposition, wanna fuck, Manson's sexual proposition, and wanna die, his ultimatum. All of these questions are posed to the previously mentioned challengers that want to unlock his box. These are your only choices, but ultimately none of them will end in you opening the box if you ever succeed. They're decoys that Manson uses to remain in control. He then ties it together with try your luck, lay down your goddamn arms. Manson adds a bit of dark humor with try your luck, insinuating that he knows that the challenger is taking a gamble. But he also knows that they're playing against the house, Manson. So they're going to lose, implying that it's rigged from the start. It's the whole, you play against the house, you're gonna lose, kind of saying. Building off of this darker sense of humor, Manson then adds a sarcastic, almost command-like statement with lay down your goddamn arms. He's both demanding submission while glorifying the aggression at the same time, which highlights the hypocrisy of Manson, who says he wants peace, but his actions will search for violence. Which again goes back to the search for identity of he doesn't know which person he wants to be. There isn't a key you can use on me. There isn't a key, so lay down your arms. With this lyric, Manson is saying that the box with a lock on it actually doesn't have a key, and there really is no way to open it, and you will never find a way to either. This way, Manson, again, maintains control over his individuality. It's his refusal to conform. You're a book, and every page is written in words I cannot read. So I burn, gotta burn, gotta burn, gotta burn it. This metaphor is used to show the person, institution, or system that Manson is referring to. It's an enigma to him. He doesn't understand its existence because he doesn't have an answer to that question, and it only further angers him. So with this anger, he decides that if he can't understand it, then it's just better to destroy it. However, I do think this also shows just how susceptible Manson is to this way of thinking, and the same way of thinking that the people and the institutions have against him and the things they would like to do to him. Because he will not conform, and because they don't understand Manson, it's best to just hide or destroy Manson. So it's almost like fighting fire with fire. This song both excites me and confuses me because I enjoy the song and it's one of my favorites on the album, but it makes me question why songs like this and No Reflection weren't the primary style of this album, because Manson does it very well. Though to a point, I can see people viewing this as, or even Manson himself viewing this as, two Deftones meets Alice in Chains, and wouldn't want to do a similar style like this for the entire album. But a great song nonetheless. Moving on to track 11, Murderers Are Getting Prettier Every Day. In my opinion, this is the heaviest song on the record. It just sucks it took until basically the end of the album to get a song like this thrown in. Instrumentally, there isn't really much happening here either. The drums take the spotlight with the double kick pretty much going throughout the whole song, which brings some energy back to the album and builds off of what the original, or the previous song, Lay Down Your Goddamn Arms, was starting. The guitar gets a chance to shine around the 3-minute and 3-second mark with a guitar solo. One of my biggest gripes with this song comes with the vocals again. They feel too oversaturated and become muddy, which buries them in the mix, making it difficult to understand the lyrics. Now, a claim can be made that the saturation was done to make the vocals more of a texture in the mix, which it does pull off. However, that means that the instrumental would have to make up for the lack of vocal clarity. And as I said, there really isn't much going on here. Thematically, the song, to me, talks about the beauty and destruction, or the alluring nature of evil. Do you always have to hire actors to play the devils that talk me out of my suicides? Here, I believe Manson is giving us a glimpse into his own worldview by talking to himself. Hire actors to play. This sounds like Manson doesn't necessarily experience these urges himself, or at least to the intensity that he portrays, but rather that he hires actors or consciously constructed characters to perform these conflicts for dramatic effect. We know this from characters he's created like the Antichrist Superstar, Omega from the Mechanical Animals, etc. The Devils. I think this represents the darker aspect of his psyche as he grapples with the allure of self-destruction. You're just a ringtone that happens when you get sick. With this lyric, I believe Manson is trying to dehumanize the characters that he creates. By saying you're just a ringtone, I think it's suggesting that their existence is nothing more than an interpretation, or my bad, an interruption in Manson's own narrative. They can easily be ignored, dismissed, but are more of a nuisance to him than anything. That happens when you get sick. Here, Manson is equating the characters and the thoughts that he creates for them to a disease. They are a symptom of the underlying illness of being attracted to the beauty in the monster. Enough to call the one with the bullet, or enough to call the one with bullet holes for eyes. This lyric I interpret as Manson saying that we all have been desensitized to violence. We've all seen so much that it's more of a spectacle now than a horrid image to look at. Fall on your knees. I hear the horrid voices of someone else's angels. Manson, I think, is using this lyric as an opportunity to showcase the seductive power of the dark side of human nature. The horrid voices are the temptations of these forbidden desires that are presented as both destructive and beautiful at the same time. I don't have to see to know that murderers are getting prettier every day. I believe the statement I don't need to see is a direct reference back to the lyric bullet holes for eyes earlier in the song, implying that we've lost our ability to differentiate between acknowledgement and glorification. And what I mean by that is we can acknowledge violence and acknowledge that it exists in media, but now it's become a thing where people are hungry for it, where, the news is boring unless there's a murder, or we're talking about, a serial killer or something like that, something of that nature, where we're actually glorifying it and we find entertainment out of the violence itself. The following line, murderers are getting prettier every day, is a very interesting lyric as it pulls from two different extremes. Murder is supposed to be considered a morally abhorrent thing to do, and something pretty is supposed to be attractive to the eyes. These are polar opposites of each other, kind of building off what I was talking about with acknowledgement and glorification, yet we still glorify these acts in entertainment and our news. Like how people are fans of serial killers, people like, we consume entertainment based around them. It's just overall a very eye-opening topic that people don't want to admit that they are a part of. Thematically and lyrically, it is very, very intriguing. But again, instrumentally, just doesn't really do anything for me. Moving on to track 12 and the title track, Born Villain. The industrial foundation holds the song together with an almost mechanical coldness that fuels the feeling of detachment. The use of acoustic guitar is a welcomed atmospheric addition that helps to give the song some identity as well. Manson's vocals come to the forefront with this soundscape and are the primary driving force for the song itself. However, the instrumental always feels like it's building up to something that the vocals never really match, like during the chorus. There's a bit of the release, or what I'm looking for, around the 4-minute and 48-second mark of the song. But it ultimately feels unsatisfying, like there was more that could have been done. Thematically, the song delves into the rejection of conformity, violence, and individuality. I could give you a dozen fresh, cut, pink, or red, or white. I wonder if they knew what they would grow to become. I see this lyric as having two meanings that could also intertwine with one another. The first implying how fragile life and innocence are by using flowers as an abstract form of imagery. The cut is insinuating the loss of both life and innocence, while the following line, I wonder if they knew what they would grow to become, highlights just how unpredictable life can be. The second being that it's a representation of the pressures and expectations society puts on people. The dozen can be used to symbolize the different paths that were available to each individual that society has cut, because it wasn't what society wanted you to do. Again, saying, I wonder if they knew what they would grow to become, to show the lost potential of their individuality. You'll have to cut it down and burn me into splinters, or I'll unwrap the strings. If the flowers being cut in the last line are a representation of individuality, then I can see this as a continuation of that point. Here, I believe it symbolizes that individuality and you is the oppressing force attempting to control it. Manson's basically saying that they'll have to destroy him or he will be the one to destroy them and unwrap the strings. That was me from your finger, and I'll hang you in your bedroom burial ground. With this, I feel like Manson is showing that parasitic relationship individuality has with society, where it wants to be free from society, but it also can't survive without it. Because without society, individuality just becomes the new norm. If everyone is an individual, then no one is. Second part, and I'll hang you in your bedroom burial ground, is Manson's threat to desecrate the most intimate parts of the oppressor's life through psychological or emotional torment. There is a taste for blood, and it's something deep inside. To me, this line suggests that there's a primal urge or desire for violence, and that the taste for blood is a metaphor used to show the darker and destructive nature of people. Become. This is perhaps the most important lyric in the entire song and possibly the entire album, in my opinion. Repeating become over and over again, Manson's essentially speaking dreams to reality or words to reality. It's almost an anthem to everyone listening to become what you really are and stop hiding behind these facades that society has forced upon us. I'm born villain, don't pretend to be a victim. The closing statement of the song, where Manson essentially says that he is the villain of society because he was born to be who he was born to be. He was born to be who he was born to be, and will continuously reject all the confines that society will force on him. By rejecting being the victim, he's acknowledging that all outcomes are of his own choices and not that of society's. He can no longer blame society, only himself, which then again goes back to a lot of the other points in other songs he was making of becoming that higher power, that one in charge, in control of their own destiny. But with that accountability comes freedom. So you think that I asshole? Moving on to track 13, Breaking the Same Old Ground. In my opinion, this is the closing track of the album, as the following song, You're So Vain, is just a cover, and I'm not really going to talk about it much because it's a cover. This song takes the minimalist approach when it comes to the instrumental, allowing for both the vocals and atmospheric electronics to take the reins for once. Both instrumentally and lyrically, the song is quite repetitive, but that works well with the themes of the song, like monotony, disillusionment, repetition. With lyrics like, "And then I found how to be what you want. I was out looking for something new." Manson's basically saying that he found what he would have to do in order to appease society and fit in, but decided that he didn't like what they wanted him to do, and he went out looking for something else to fulfill himself instead. Except he will eventually find himself back in the same spot and beginning the search for something new again, which goes more into the following lyric: "Digging too deep, now it's too late. We just keep breaking the same old ground." Manson's search for something new is leading him right back to where he started. So he keeps digging deeper, which feels like he's making progress. But in the end result, he will still be the same, and he's going to be in the same place. He's going to find himself back at the beginning. It's just a circle in this loop that he constantly finds himself in. So you think I asked for this? Let me show you what I think of your lips. Here I think this is Manson's attempt to regain control of a situation that has gotten out of hand, asking the listener if they think he deserves the persecution that he faces for being who he is, while also saying that he's had enough of being these people's verbal punching bags and would love to show them how he really feels. He expands on this in the next line: "Come on, use your fist," to emphasize the darkest urges to solve one's problems through violence. "I am owned by death, and I'm in love with oblivion." With this lyric, I think it's Manson's way of saying that no one else can have control over him, because death already owns him. His existence can't be purchased by anyone or anything else. And finally, closing it all with, "I'm in love with oblivion." This is his acceptance of his own dark desires and infatuation with the beauty in destruction. While I do like what the song was going for, I can't help but feel like the previous song and title track, "Born Villain," would have been a better ending for the album, with the final lyrics to that song pretty much, like I said, encapsulating the overarching themes of the album. So with all that being said, let's get into the rating and the conclusion. I'm going to give this album a solid 6.1 out of 10, and I'll get into my reasons why. The album thematically dives into individuality, violence, control, and the allure to the darkest parts of human nature. And it also shows the skeleton of the creative direction that would later be more fleshed out on the preceding albums like Pale Emperor and Heaven Upside Down. Born Villain brings with it some instances of resurging tones from that of Manson's earlier works on songs like Hey Cruel World and Children of Cain, while simultaneously bringing in some new creative ideas with the spoken word vocal style on The Gardener and the grungy nu metal influences on Lay Down Your Goddamn Arms. Unfortunately, though, this is where my praising stops and where the critiques begin. There were a lot of songs that I mentioned during this review where the vocals just felt completely out of place and didn't sit well in the mix as a whole. Overall, Manson's vocal performances on most of these tracks are honestly forgettable and don't ever make you feel like the songs were worth the listen. For me, the album from start to finish can be summarized as it just takes forever to get to the point. The constant use of buildups and repetitive use of song structure kills any momentum, because as soon as you reach a high point, you're immediately brought back down to a low again in the following track that doesn't capitalize on the tone set in the previous song. A good handful of songs on this album have an ambient intro that lasts anywhere from 20 to 60 seconds, and for the most part just feels unnecessary, like it's fluff essentially, because you're then waiting about another 20 to 30 seconds while the instruments like drums, guitar, and bass play their intro riffs and rhythms before the vocals even start. This 20 to 30 second instrumental intro is pretty consistent across every song on the album if you get rid of all the ambient intros. But then, like I said, the vocals aren't offering anything worthwhile for that entire wait, which ultimately just makes all the songs feel the same and makes the experience feel like it's dragging. In turn, making the 13-track album length, 14 if you include the You're So Vain cover, proved to be the album's biggest weakness. The record is too bloated with too many similar sounding songs to keep the experience interesting. Songs like Pistol Whipped, The Gardener, The Flowers of Evil, Disengaged, and Breaking the Same Old Ground could have easily not been a part of this album and would have helped trim a lot of unnecessary fat that the record has. For me, the highlights of this album are No Reflection, Overneath, The Path of Misery, Children of Cain, and Lay Down Your Goddamn Arms. But even with these highlights, I don't ever find myself coming back to this album or having an urge to come back to listen to even the highlights themselves. The ending of this album is the final problem, because it feels like there are two different endings both competing to be the record's swan song: Born Villain and Breaking the Same Old Ground. As I mentioned earlier, I think Born Villain would better encapsulates the album as a whole, but I also do enjoy the approach of Breaking the Same Old Ground. But this exactly proves my point, because there are two songs trying to accomplish the same thing, which makes one or the other feel completely unnecessary. And I would say the same thing between The Gardener and The Flowers of Evil. Those songs feel way too similar to one another, where if you take out one, it would just make the other one stand out more. Making the final song's title, in this instance, feel quite apropos to how I felt with the entire album experience. It just makes you feel like you're breaking the same old ground. So that'll conclude my review of Born Villain by Marilyn Manson. Like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on this album. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. See ya.